Good morning, friends. Welcome back. Let's begin with a chant again. This is one of the chants of Yogananda's, and it's a translation of an ancient Sanskrit poem from Adi Shankar, as far as I'm aware. And it is a beautiful prayer of stripping away our ego delusions and all of the attachments that bind us to delusion until finally realizing that if I'm not this nor that, if I'm neither this nor that, then the only thing left is that I am He. I am the blissful Spirit. I am God beyond all creation, at the heart of all mutation. I am He. I am He. Blissful Spirit, blessed Spirit, I am He. And let's sing this chant together and feel that with every repetition of discarding one of our ego identifications, that we come closer and closer to that essential experience of being bliss, of being joy. And that when we say, blessed Spirit, I am He, that's really what we're saying, is blissful Spirit, that I am engrossed in the bliss of the Spirit. I am He.
Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Sky nor earth nor metals am I. Sky nor earth nor metals am I. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. No birth, no death, no caste have I. No birth, no death, no caste have I. Father, mother, have I none. Father, mother, have I none. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Sky nor earth nor metals am I. Sky nor earth nor metals am I. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. No birth, no death, no caste have I. No birth, no death, no caste have I. Father, mother, have I none. Father, mother, have I none. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Sky nor earth nor metals am I. Blessed Spirit, I am He, I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He, I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He, I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He.
Let's meditate together for just a few moments. Feel yourself unencumbered by body, mind, nor intellect. Just expanding at the heart of your consciousness into infinity. And let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, dearest friend, beloved God, great masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, we bow humbly before you. Please bless us today with a deeper experience of our true nature, of our true union with Thee. Help us to shuffle off the limitations that bind us to ego attachment, to our likes and dislikes, attractions and repulsions. Give us vision divine, that we may perceive Thee everywhere. Om, peace. Amen. So today we're going to be diving into a Whispers from Eternity that was recommended to me. And this is Whispers number 147, Demand Not to be Enslaved by the Ego or by Ego-Centered Passivity. So this is an ambitious prayer, like trying to get as much bang for your buck as possible. This prayer would rank high on the list. But what's interesting and just something worth contemplating is Yogananda categorizes or organizes his prayers in a few different sections in this book. There are miscellaneous demands, there are invocational demands, there are prayer demands for children, but then there's a section on prayer demands for devotion. And this prayer, interestingly, falls into that category. And so it's just interesting from a text analysis perspective to realize that as far as he categorized this prayer, he put this as a prayer demand for devotion first and foremost. And then how it expresses itself is like a facet on that diamond of the gem of devotion. So it's just interesting to think about it in that regard. That perhaps the emphasis first and foremost is to help open our hearts and to help give us a deeper sense of devotional aspiration for our goal, for divine consciousness. And that this prayer is just sort of helping to pave the way to that experience. So once again, this is demand not to be enslaved by the ego or by ego-centered passivity. And I just want to actually, I'm going to keep interrupting myself. I was reflecting on these prayer demands because these are lofty, lofty prayers. I mean, the demand, not just a humble prayer, but this is a demand not to be enslaved by the ego. And the ego, as we know, is perhaps one of the greatest enemies on the path towards God realization. That this limited sense of I, identified with the body, is one of the greatest foes in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita that has to fall before the soul reclaims its kingdom. And so to demand not to be enslaved by the ego, that's a big ask. Like that's a lofty goal. We're not talking about climbing molehills, we're talking of climbing Mount Everest. And so when we read a prayer like this, it can feel maybe a little over our heads or a little presumptuous to be praying for these things. but it is ultimately all of our birthright. It is ultimately all of our state, our natural resting state of consciousness, and we are just returning to these states. And so when we read a prayer like this, I think it's important to remind ourselves that this is not presumptuous to pray in this way. And in fact, it's very natural to us, and we just have to remember that. And sincerity, I think, is one of the key attributes to effective prayer. Because I could read these words and I could say them well, but if they're not backed up by the force of my own sincere feelings, by the sincerity of my heart, then the words might reach 10 feet into the air before doing a swan dive back into my material consciousness. But if we have deep sincerity that, Lord, I do want to overcome the enslavement of my ego or ego-centered passivity, and just come back to that essential realization that I do really want that. I don't want to be limited by this little ego. I don't want to be enslaved by ego-centered passivity. And isn't that true if we really think about it? You know, we are habituated to resting in our egos and to thinking that it's our natural state. But if you really think about it, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to be in a more expanded state of consciousness? Wouldn't it be wonderful to feel yourself as a part of the whole universe? I think that would be wonderful. And it's important to tune back into that wonder before starting a prayer like this. So that way there's just a single thread of true sincerity. Even if we can't bring our hearts up to the level of the entire prayer at first, if we can just hold on to like a single thread, then Master's vibration through the prayer will help pull us up the rest of the way, as long as we have just a little seed of sincerity. So before I begin this, therefore, let's try just closing your eyes for a moment and feeling in your heart for whatever aspiration you do have to overcome your ego, to overcome your limited ego awareness, and to expand into a higher reality. And then feel that these words are an expression of that desire, an expression of that earnest aspiration, and that they are magnetizing the power of your heart and the sincerity of your soul into experiencing that consciousness more deeply. So Master writes, I want to use my will, but guide it ever, Father, towards the golden paradise of all fulfillment. For I would be infinity's smiling child, confident of being imprisoned no longer behind bars of fruitless desire and withered hopes. I would break the shameful cords of lethargy that have presumed to hold me and step fearlessly into freedom. Released, I now blaze my way through forests of every limitation and delusion. Oh, my little vain ego may strut proudly, saying, behold my glory, worship me. But I will look through its transparent form and behold thine unimaginable beauty, clothed in the subtle form of the whole universe. The silence-tuned hearing of my soul will ignore that tiny, boasting masquerader, my little self impersonating thee, and will listen rapturously to the wind-born, fragrant music of thine own matchless voice whispering across the ages, I am He. Wow. Isn't that a wonderful prayer? And there's so much in it, so many areas that we could really sincerely ask for God's help. And if we were to be able to pull on any of those areas, perhaps the whole rest of the prayer would become more revealed to us. So let's take a look at it. That first opening sentence is very interesting and very personal. I feel it very deeply. I want to use my own will, but guide it ever, Father, toward the golden paradise of all fulfillment. We all have an individual will. We all have a divine, potent power that has been given to us as our birthright. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel a little bit like a loose cannon. Like if you've ever seen a hose with too much pressure shooting through it. This used to happen when I was a kid, and all of a sudden the hose is whipping around, and it's not just watering what you had intended, but it's getting you soaking wet, and it's ruining other things at the same time. It's not very pleasant. And so we are sort of like that we have this divine current that is capable of moving through us, but unless we guide it properly and direct it properly, it can cause more trouble than good. And developing will is so important on the spiritual path, but learning to use it appropriately is also imperative, because we don't want to develop, Yogananda said, if I heard this from somebody else, I never read it, but apparently he said, like, you too can develop an iron will like Genghis Khan or other great conquerors. And Genghis Khan was not necessarily a very nice guy, but he surely had an iron will, an indomitable will. And we want to combine our will with the guidance of our Father ever towards the golden paradise of all fulfillment. Because let's face it, until we're free, our own discrimination is highly flawed. And we need to recognize the fact that we have power. We have the power to make right decisions and wrong decisions. And when we make the wrong decisions, it causes suffering, and it causes more ego limitation and bondage. And when we make the right decisions, when we direct our energy in the appropriate direction, it leads us towards greater freedom. And so this opening sentence is one of, I think, Yogananda's highest prayers, as he called it, that it's reminiscent of the I will reason. I will, and I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right path in everything. And in this prayer he says, I want to use my own will, but guide it ever, Father, toward the golden paradise of all fulfillment. Isn't that beautiful? That, if you could memorize just a single line from this prayer, that first opening prayer, is so beautiful and is so sincere, that we all do want to use our will. And in the act of using our will, we generate more energy and magnetism to transform. But only if it's really moving in the right direction will we be transformed into that which we're really seeking. For I would be infinity's smiling child, confident of being imprisoned no longer behind bars of fruitless desire and withered hopes. Now, just a funny side note here. I don't know why my brain read it this way, but I was reading it before we began this morning, and I read, no longer behind bars of fruitless, and I thought, fruitless bars, like a nut bar. No, we're not talking about snack food. We're talking about being bound behind the strong bars of ego delusion. For I would be infinity's smiling child, confident of being imprisoned no longer behind bars of fruitless desire and withered hopes. It's really worth contemplating those two things, fruitless desire and withered hopes. Because desire, as Yogananda puts it in one of my favorite chants, desire, my great enemy. That we have so many desires that our ego thinks will bring us happiness, and we use that God-given will and vitality and our focused ego concentration to try and achieve that desire. But how often do we achieve that desire only to realize that the only thing it brought us was more suffering, and then at the end of it we just feel more depleted rather than more within God's presence? And so, and like he says, I would be infinity's smiling child. I don't want to be your weeping child no longer. I want to be your smiling son, confident of being imprisoned no longer behind the bars of my own fruitless desires and my withered hopes. I would break the shameful cords of lethargy that have presumed to hold me and step fearlessly into freedom. Just as a little note here, when we use the word I would, I think it's sort of intimating that I would like to, that it would be my desire. It's my great ambition. I would break the shameful cords of lethargy that have presumed to hold me and step fearlessly into freedom. This is really true to my own experience, that how many times have we been bound by the delusion of lethargy, to think that we cannot break free of our present consciousness, to think that we don't have the requisite energy to transform and to meet life's obstacles and to overcome them. When I was energizing 6 times a day, I was astounded to realize how indomitable my will became, but also my sense of courageous acceptance of life. That I was no longer so bound by those shameful cords of lethargy. That the no-saying principle in my consciousness was starting to fall away. And I realized that I could always say yes to life, and I could embrace its trials and its obstacles joyfully, because every time I did so, it helped me to shake off those coils of lethargy, to break the bars of fruitless desires and withering hopes, and step more into freedom. But we have to take this one step at a time. And every time you feel the shameful cords of lethargy creeping over you, remember that the battle for self-realization happens moment to moment. And we think that there will be grand tests and great victories, and suddenly our life will be changed, irreversibly for the better. And those moments perhaps come. But the victories are also the little victories. As someone in the physical therapy world said, someone asked him, what's the best way to ensure progress? And he said, progress is the aggregation of marginal gains, which is a really wordy way of saying progress comes from putting one foot in front of the other and just taking little baby steps up the mountain. And so for us, whenever you feel those shameful cords of lethargy binding you, remember this line: I would break the shameful cords of lethargy that have presumed to hold me, and step fearlessly into freedom. Because when we overcome lethargy, we are stepping towards freedom. We are stepping towards dynamism. Because whenever you have energy, whenever you have willingness, whenever you have that current of God's power flowing through you, you have options. You're no longer a victim, but you are a current player in your life's circumstances. And so whenever you feel that moment of lethargy, that exhalation of your inner power, that exhalation of your sense of virtue, just remember, this is where the battle of my life is being fought, in these moments. And just see if you can redirect that current. Maybe just subtly, maybe by retreating from the obstacle for a moment until you can engross yourself in a higher vibration and then come out again stronger. Or maybe it's just that you need to rally the troops of your willingness and of your God remembrance and charge once more into the breach and prove to yourself that you have the power to conquer. Released, I now blaze my way through forests of every limitation and delusion. Oh, my little vain ego may strut proudly, saying, behold my glory, worship me. But I will look through its transparent form and behold thine unimaginable beauty, clothed in the subtle form of the whole universe. Isn't that beautiful? When we do overcome the shameful cords of lethargy, our little vain ego may strut and say, look what I've done, look what I've accomplished. But we can look through that, through the transparency of our own ego, and recognize that it's God's unimaginable beauty that's flowing through us, that's flowing through the entire world. This is perhaps why the energization exercises are so powerful and so essential and form a real cornerstone of our techniques, because they really help you to feel that God is the doer, that God's vitality, God's power is what gives you power. And that without His love, without His grace, without His energy animating you, we would just be a limp fish, a dead fish. Let's see. The silence-tuned hearing of my soul will ignore that tiny, boasting masquerader, my little self impersonating thee, and will listen rapturously to the wind-born, fragrant music of thine own matchless voice, whispering across the ages, I am He. Beautiful. Wouldn't that be wonderful, to be able to listen beyond our own little tiny ego to hear that wind-borne fragrant music of God's presence, God's matchless voice whispering eternally, I am Spirit, I am He. And how do we do that? Well, thankfully, Master puts the directions directly into the prayer. The silence-tuned hearing of my soul will ignore that tiny boasting masquerader. And so he's giving us the path to experience this, which is to practice attuning our hearing to silence. That we want to listen very, very, very deeply. And I heard an interesting saying once that silence is not the absence of sound, but it's the absence of ego. And so when we practice listening to God, try to calm the storm of our feeling and just listen with an absence of ego. Listening is a very selfless act. I used to practice free listening in Los Angeles, a part of a movement called Urban Confessional, where we would go stand on street corners with cardboard signs that said free listening, or if you need to talk, I'm here to listen. And we would just stand as an act of service, and we would allow people to talk to us. And we weren't just like a board, we would interact with them reasonably. But the goal was to listen 80% of the time and only speak 20% of the time, and to allow our speech to be a way of encouraging the person to feel heard and to confirm that we were paying attention. But really the goal was just to provide an opportunity for them to be heard. And I was amazed to discover how this practice so quickly removed my sense of little self out of the equation. Because when you offer yourself to another person humbly and in service to listen to them, you're saying that my love for you is greater than my own limited concern for myself, and that I'm willing to put aside my limitations and my own ego dialogue, and I'm willing to attend to your heart. And so the lessons we can learn from learning to listen to our fellow man, to the loved ones in our lives, is profound. But even more, the lessons we can learn from learning to listen to God. And this is like the Om technique. This is why we sit in the silence after our meditation, so we can attune our ears, we can attune our soul to the silence of God, and then we can just listen to the Lord. And I loved it as one saint asked, as someone asked a saint, what do you do in meditation? And he said, I listen to God. And the devotee asked, what does God do in your meditation? And he said, God listens. And so there's this like sacred communion where both parties are putting aside themselves and are just coming together to listen to the soul song, that silent emanation of your heart with another. And we can do that with God in the most intimate and deep of divine romance. That silence-tuned hearing of my soul will ignore that tiny, boasting masquerader, my little self impersonating thee, and will listen rapturously to the wind-borne, fragrant music of thine own matchless voice, whispering across the ages, I am He. And so, my friends, let us endeavor to tune our hearing to the silence of God's omnipresence, so we can ignore that tiny boasting masquerader of our own egos and be engrossed more and more in that incredible promise, I am He. God bless you, my friends, and I'll see you next week.